Assalamu alaikum everyone, you're watching Samispeaks. My name is Sami T and Naseem. It's good to be back with you all again. We've got a big show for you all this week. We've got a lot to get into, a lot to discuss. It's again been quite a slow news week, but the difference being this week is that we've got a lot to respond to. So we're going to be doing that, inshallah. What are we going to be discussing? We're going to be having a look at the Muslim ruler debate. We uploaded a clip which did quite well. Not necessarily about Muslim rulers per se, more so about nationalism, whether nationalism has a place in Islam. But it kicked off a little bit of a discussion, some debate, a bit of discourse going on in the comments section, which is not new for us, but at a larger extent, I guess. And I just thought we'd clear up a few misconceptions there. What also are we going to be having a look at? Farage resigning from his seat in Clacton, triggering a by-election. Quite big news, that is. We're going to be getting into that. And then also sort of having a look at the far right in general also. And then our featured story today, is Rupert Lowe appearing on Joe Rogan, right? Oh my goodness, I've watched this in full, and it has to be covered, it has to be discussed, it just has to be, right? So we're going to be getting into that, really debunking all of the lies that Lowe has said, because it's just lie after lie after lie. So let's get straight into that, okay? Rupert Lowe appears on Joe Rogan's podcast, Joe Rogan Experience, JRE, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, it was, I don't want to say it was a pleasant watch. I watched it on 2x speed. I mean, it's not easy watching or listening to Rupert Lowe for 2 hours. But, you know, it was all right, right? I found myself agreeing quite a bit with Lowe, especially towards the start of the episode, because, you know, he was really sort of going into how he thinks politically. And I actually found myself agreeing with a lot of the things he had to say, you know, him really honing in on individualism rather than collectivism, something, you know, I very much agree with. And I feel like our move away from sort of sovereignty more towards the EU took that individualism away from each and every person in this country, and we became more collectivist, and I'm not a fan of that. In my opinion. And then also him bringing up things like limited government, a minimal state, you know, a lot of things that the US encouraged during their founding. Again, you know, things and concepts, terms I'm quite a big fan of. So from that standpoint, I did actually see myself agreeing with Lowe, but the reality here is that, my goodness, I mean, during this conversation, just lie after lie after lie, you might as well call him Rupert Lie, right? You might as well call him Rupert Lie, because there were just so many. We've written them down. We're going to debunk each and every one of them, right? There are 4 main ones. So the 4 main ones, what is the first one? The first one is Sharia courts. So Lowe makes this whole sort of big deal around the UK having Sharia courts, you know, and Joe Rogan just eats it up, no pushback. And I mean, that is really the staple of this conversation. Joe just completely taking what Lowe has to say at face value, no pushback, no scrutiny, no debate, no nothing, right? And it's not like you have to make your guest uncomfortable or anything, but, you know, Jamie's there, man. You just, like, ask Jamie to search these things up. But Sharia courts do not exist in the United Kingdom, okay? When Lowe says that, he's completely and blatantly lying. I don't know if it's intentional. It probably is. Can't say for certain, but it probably is. The reality is that in the UK, we have things called Sharia councils. And even then, I mean, these are anything. They're just basically glorified mosques, right? They initiate marriage and divorce and, you know, settlement between husband and wife and other things, but nothing that breaches the law or goes against the law of the land. Absolutely not. Just like Jewish individuals in the UK have Beth Din courts, right? They have Jewish courts, and the same thing is used for those courts where, you know, it's, you know, mostly family matters, where both parties agree to it. So, you know, I mean, and they never bring those Beth Dins up, because the reality here is that they, you know, we're dealing with very disingenuous actors. For as well as Lowe's politics, or at least his ideology, in terms of individualism, you know, him being skeptical of the EU, you know, I agree with all that. But the reality here is that, you know, he's blatantly lying here, right? And that's not even the worst of it. I mean, that's really more of a cultural thing. He really, really defames Islam in this interview and just blatantly lies. I mean, it's blatant lies, right? What did he say? The first one he said is that adultery, right? Adultery. He said that in Islam, white girls, right, or just women in general, if a Muslim man is to have sex with her, or even worse, rape her, I mean, why would you even say things like this? Then that is not considered adultery, so therefore it's permissible in Islam. And Joe just eats it up, and he says that they are considered meat in Islam. Women, white women, are considered meat. I mean, this is reprehensible, I'm sorry to say. And then and I think Joe slightly pushes back on this point, slightly. And what does Rupert say in response? It's in our inquiry report. It's in our inquiry report. We've got so and so saying this of the ringleader, the gang member of the rape gang. That doesn't mean anything. That's nothing to do with Islam. That's just one guy saying something. If I'm a Christian guy and I rape a non-Christian, sorry, if there is a Christian guy and he rapes a non-Christian girl, and he says, it's allowed in Christianity, you're just going to take that at face value? You're just going to say, okay, that's the Christian rule then? No, obviously he's lying. There is nothing in Islam to prove what Rupert Lowe has just said. And that's why when Joe slightly pushes back, he says, in our inquiry report. Is it in the Quran? Is there any hadith that you can bring up that suggests that that is the case? There is zero. There is zero evidence, right? So this is just a blatant lie. And Joe just eats it up. Joe just eats the slop up, right? That's one. What else? So we went over Sharia courts. We went over adultery. Slavery. He says slavery is allowed in Islam. Slavery today is not something that happens in Islam. Slavery is something that was prominent and relevant to war times, right? To prisoners of war is when slavery happened. But in the modern day, no. It doesn't happen in Islam. It doesn't even happen in Christianity, right? Slavery is allowed in Christianity, just like it is technically allowed in Islam. But the way Lau frames it here is just completely disingenuous, right? And his low IQ followers, his low IQ supporters, uneducated supporters who don't even have a GCSE are just going to eat this up. I mean, Lau's a smart guy. I'll give him that, right? Like I've just said, but in terms of his politics, individualism, him being a Eurosceptic, I agree with him there. Or minimal state, separation of powers, limited government, I agree with him. But when he's bringing all of literally just lying, right? And then the last thing is that he says, so he goes over slavery, he goes over adultery, and then the Sharia courts. And he also says that, so rape, right? So he says that if a woman's been raped, then she needs 4 witnesses to the rape. This is not true either, right? He's applying the standard of having sexual intercourse, right, outside of marriage as the standard of rape. That's not the case. Zina in Islam, when you have sex outside of wedlock, is to be there has to be 4 witnesses present that have seen that to protect the people from slander, right? But you're applying that to rape. There doesn't need to be any eyewitnesses of rape in Islam, right? We go over circumstantial evidence, right? So it's just another lie. It's just blatant lies, right? But the reality is that no one's going to fact check this. No one's I'm fact checking it right now, right? And they're not going to like it, but it's just the truth, right? He's just lying on Islam, defaming Islam. If you want to call them Pakistani grooming gangs, and I think we'll get into the inquiry report in a future episode, inshallah. I need to really read that in depth to comment on it. But if we want to call them Pakistani grooming gangs, which you already do, call them that, no problem. I have no problem with that. The moment you call them Muslim grooming gangs, there is no correlation to Islam in regards to those grooming gangs whatsoever. There's no correlation whatsoever, right? So that needs to be stopped. They are, if you want to call them Pakistani grooming gangs, call them that. Do not call them Islamic grooming gangs, because in fact, in an Islamic country with Islamic governance, with Islamic law, what's going to happen to them? They're going to get stoned to death. They're going to get lashed, right? So at the worst, they're going to get killed. Does that happen in the UK? No. Rapists in the UK, I mean, come on, man. Come on, is this even a conversation? With how many rapists in the UK, white men, that get away with rape in the UK? This isn't even a conversation, right? And slavery, you're talking about slavery as a white man, transatlantic slavery, which you and your ancestors committed. I'm sorry to say. I'm sorry to go there, sound like a liberal, but this is the reality, right? In Islam, slaves are given rights, but it's not even something that's practiced today anyway, so it doesn't matter. It's a moot point. But there were no rights to slaves back in the day from the white man, from the European forces, from the United States. So we've cleared up the misconceptions there. You know, like I said, overall, I guess we could end on a light note. He seems like a traditional Tory, really, Lowe does, or Eurosceptic, an individualist, that sort of thing. More of a civnat than an ethnat, a civic nationalist. But yeah, it was. I guess it was an interesting watch. But we've cleared up the misconceptions there. What else are we going to be discussing today? So Nigel Farage resigns from public office. He resigns from his seat in Clacton, triggering a by-election, which, I mean, the reports going into it, people were a little bit confused as to whether he would run again. But of course, you know, I think, you know, he had a scandal with donations and all of that. Now that's been swept under the rug. He's going to run again. It's actually very smart what he's doing, but that's been swept under the rug, the donation scandal that he had. And now he's triggered a by-election, which will commence sometime, I believe, mid-August, mid to late August, where Labour have said that they won't run. The Conservatives have said that they won't run. I believe Greens have said that they won't run. All the major parties that we have now, Lib Dems, have said that they won't run in this by-election, meaning that the only two contestants here is Nigel Farage and Count Binface. Is this even real life? Do you know what I mean? Obviously, Nigel's going to win this, and he's just going to get his seat back, right? So it's not really a story. So what I thought we would discuss instead of that is we'd have a look at really respond directly to the far right, right? We'll go back into discussing Lowe also. So, you know, we've had a lot of comments. You know, they seem to be infatuated with the content, the far right. So I thought we'd address them point blank and tell them how it is, right? So the far right seem to be, we just discussed Lowe being a civic nationalist. The far right seem to be, if I were to characterize them as ethnic nationalists, right? Ethno-nationalists, sort of ethnats, right? And they are really, from what I can see from them, interested in preserving the race that they see to be as white in the United Kingdom, which I don't disagree with. And some even going to the extent of saying that they will deport millions and millions and millions, right? So tens of millions, maybe. Who knows, right? It really depends on the type of far-right individual you're speaking to. But it seems that they are quite, you know, extreme on the internet. And then in real life, they're a bit more reserved, a bit more moderate. But let's just take some of those extreme positions, right? I mean, Lowe said it himself. If millions have to go, if that means millions go, then millions go, right? That's what he said himself. So does he actually hold that position, Lowe? And the reality is that, you know, he said very clearly recently that he detests far-right, you know, ethno-nationalists. He detests far-right ethnats, right? He said he's a fan of multiculturalism. He has no problem with multiculturalism. This is what Rupert Lowe said. These are Rupert Lowe's own words. You can't argue against these words, right? This is the leader that you're putting your trust into. So he has no problem with multiculturalism. He detests far-right ethno-nationalists. He condemns you. All these people under my comment section, he condemns all of you, right? It's not me saying I condemn you. He condemns you, right? What else did he say? He had a piece. I don't think it was a piece. I think it was a podcast for, I believe it was The Spectator, perhaps, where it was Michael Gove interviewing Rupert Lowe, right? Michael Gove asks him the question very clearly. He said, if we have 10,000 Australians and Canadians, both Commonwealth countries, migrants coming into the UK, or 4,000 Nigerians and Indians, both Commonwealth countries, right? Migrants coming into the UK, which would you prefer, right? And guess how he answers? He says either. He says it's not about nationality or culture, it's about ability. It's about skill. It's about capital, what they bring into the country, right? What does that show? That shows he's a civic nationalist. That shows that he doesn't care about colour or skin or race. He cares about ability. He's a meritocrat, essentially, right? He cares for meritocracy. So that completely just everything the far right say, where they talk about, you know, we want it to be a white country. He's literally saying, I don't care about the skin colour. I don't care whether they're Australian or Canadian. He likes to talk about the Anglo-Saxon world, but he's rejecting to answer this question that Michael Gove asks him, right? What else? That's just Rupert Lowe, right? What about Nigel Farage? Farage is asked point blank, what do you think about deportations? Farage says they are a political impossibility, right? This is what Farage says. Just before I think it was just after the 24 election, right? In the UK, right? And the reality is that Farage isn't, he's telling the truth. It is a political impossibility. These people say deport, deport, deport. It is quite literally a political impossibility. And he said this before Trump was even elected. If we look at Trump in the United States, Trump was elected on a mandate to deport. He was elected on many things like no new wars, mass deportations, the single largest mass deportation operation the history has ever seen, the United States has ever seen, and other things like no tax on tips, tariffs, and all of that, right? But the main thing was immigration and the economy. And I would argue probably immigration was even larger because of the southern border and how many came in under Biden. And how many did come in under Biden? About 11 million, right? Is the number that they say. 5 million from previous administrations, meaning there's about 16 million illegal immigrants in the UK as Trump comes into office. You know, 2 years later, how many has Trump deported? Does any of you know? When you say these statements, do you even know how many Trump has deported? Not even 500,000, right? Or maybe just over 500,000. So 16 million illegal immigrants in the United States as Trump takes office, right? As Trump is inaugurated president of the United States, and he deports 500,000. What is that? Is that like 5%? 5%? So do you get what? Do you see what I'm saying here? How many illegals are there in the UK? Some say, I think Lau said, sorry about that. I think Lau said that there are, there's 1 million plus. That's not true. The official numbers say that there's somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 illegal migrants in the UK, right? So let's take a midpoint, 650,000, let's say. So 650,000, let's use the 5% that the US deported in Trump's first 2 years. Meaning 2 years into a Lao government, which would never happen anyway, he'd never be able to get a majority. But 2 years into Lao's government, and we've got 650,000 illegal immigrants in the UK, how many will he have deported? 5%, like 25,000. You really think 25,000 deportations is going to make your life any better? And this is the reality, it's not. deportations and immigrants as a whole have been made a blame game, right? For, with all due respect, your lackluster life, right? Your lackluster work, right? And what you're contributing to the country. The reality is that these people, I mean, the reason why Lau is successful is because he took risks. He's a business guy, right? I have had my hand in business myself. I'm studying law myself. Sometimes you have to just ignore what's going on in the world and work on yourself. It doesn't matter how bad the economy may be or how bad the world may look. If there's wars going on in elsewhere of the world, you have to focus on yourself. This is why I agree with Lau on individualism, right? You've become a collective, all moaning and whining. We have to do all these deportations, and it's going to result in 25,000 being deported. Because all the other ones you can't deport. People who have legal right to remain, you can't deport. You're going to have to repeal legislation, create new laws. It's just not going to happen. Trump's tried it, his best at it. And the court always strikes it down. The Supreme Court does. The Supreme Court will do the same in this country. So, you know, we could really speak about this for a long time, but, you know, to close this, it's very clear. Definitely Farage, but also Lau's positions are very clear, okay? They are not anti-multiculturalism. In fact, Lau said he's pro-multiculturalism, right? Farage makes it very clear that deportations are a political impossibility, okay? And other things too. Like Lau completely condemning, detesting you guys. Saying that I detest far-right ethno-nationalists. That's what you guys are. He's a civic nationalist. You guys are not the same, right? So you're politically homeless, I'm sorry to say. You're going to have to find a new leader. And the reality is you're not going to find anyone. Because the furthest to the right you're going to get is Rupert Lowe. And the fact that you may think that he's going to get a majority is laughable. Not even with Farage, not even a coalition between those two parties could even create a government with a majority. It's just not going to happen, right? So you're politically homeless. Find somewhere else. Moan somewhere else. And before you click dislike, I've given you the facts. You can't argue with the facts. They're very clear, okay? So let's move on, inshallah, okay? So what are we going to be also discussing today? So the Muslim ruler debate. We uploaded a clip, like I said, which did quite well on nationalism in Islam, whether nationalism has a place in Islam. And like I said, not really necessarily about Muslim rulers, but we did briefly touch on MBS, MBZ, the Abraham Accords, all of that stuff, which is more geopolitics than religion. So what I really wanted to discuss here is the actual debate, right? And the fact that it's even a debate is, you know, it's quite displeasing. I'm not going to lie, because the Prophet's made this very clear, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made it very clear to us that, you know, rebellion is always a last resort. And rebellion can only be done when a leader is no longer a Muslim, right? Right? He is a kuffar, or a kafir, should I say. And he does an act of kufr, which, you know, takes him out of Islam, an act of kufr which is so massive that it takes him out of the fold of Islam. So the Prophet says this. You know, the companions come up to the Prophet and they said to him, if we had a leader, if we had a ruler who is so unjust and who is so dishonorable and, you know, takes our money off us and delays our prayers and all of this, should we obey? Should we, you know, can we rebel? And the Prophet says, no, as long as the ruler prays, right? That's what the Prophet says. And I'm going to get into why this is the case in a few minutes, inshallah. But there's another narration, right? Where the companions come up to the Prophet and they said the same thing. And the Prophet said there are 4 conditions when you can rebel, right? When you can overthrow. And they are, if you 1, see 2, blatant, 3, kufr, which is disbelief, of course, and then 4, right, with strong and ample evidence. So those are the 4 conditions. And if those 4 conditions are met, which is very rarely, then that would be then permissible to overthrow and rebel, right? And like we said last episode, right? The Prophet also says that even if you have a leader where he whips your back, he steals your money, you obey, right? Because the reality here is that it is better to have an unjust ruler. Sorry, the Salaf says, it is better to have an unjust ruler for 70 years than to go a day without a ruler, right? For 70 years, think about that. Than to only go a day, 24 hours without a ruler. So this is quite clear, actually. The stance, the Islamic stance, what the Prophet ﷺ says, this is not mine or your opinion. This is the Prophet's opinion, right? This is the opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as far as I am aware. But we have a lot of comments in the comment section, people even going to, some people being a bit more moderate and saying, you know what, I criticize certain policies, such and such. But some people even going to extents, takfiring some of these Muslim rulers without, like I said, without strong and ample evidence, okay? What is this going to create? Like the Salaf say, going 70 years with an unjust rule is better than going a day without a ruler. And the reason for that is because going a day without a ruler, we all have our whims and desires. We all have our own definition of what's right and how governance should work and how we should rule. I mean, nobody probably thinks that more than myself, because, the reality is that Muslims as a whole, especially the South Asian diaspora here in the UK, love politics. They love to criticize, they love to scrutinize, they love to do all of this, which is completely fine. There's no problem in that whatsoever. But for as much as we may do it for the West and what's going on here, then we turn our attention to leaders, our own Muslim rulers, and it just becomes, it is really a difficult one, right? Because, I know we all may have our opinions on what's going on, but the reality is the best thing to do here is to just keep it to ourselves, right? The scholars strictly are told, not us, not laymen, the scholars are told to inform and to guide and to tell the rulers what is what and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, right? It is on them. It's not on us. So even if you may think the scholars aren't doing that, or the scholars have been bought and paid for, or the scholars are too scared to do that, even if that's the case, that's on them, right? And even if you may think that the rulers are, so unjust and doing so much wrong, which, may be the case, that they're going to be held accountable for that, right? They're going to be held accountable for that. Just like we're going to be held accountable for our actions, and just like the scholars are going to be held accountable for whether they did or whether they didn't inform the leaders, okay? So why are we here all, saying so-and-so, saying this is right and this is wrong? It just leads to more and more division, fitna, temptation within others to also do the same, right? So turn our attention to other things, if we love to speak about politics so much, which is fine, like I said, nobody will understand that more than me, then turn our attention to other things, right? But the best thing to do here is to, for the sake of the religion, for the sake of unity across the Muslim world, right? We may not have leaders of the past or so-and-so, or, you may not think that they are up to scratch or they're subpar or whatever you want to call it. We have leaders for a reason, right? Because if we didn't have leaders, what would we have, right? What would we have? Look what happened in Libya. Look what happened in Tunisia. Look what happened during the Arab Spring, Sudan, Palestine now, which is not all at the fault of Palestine, of course, it's the fault of Israel. But war zones all across the Muslim world, right? Iran is no bigger example of this than Iran. There's no bigger example of this than Iran, right? So all of these different countries, and yes, not all blame is on the countries. There's a lot of blame that goes on, just like I said last week, that goes on the United States, definitely. But the reality here is that, do we want that? Do we want that to continue happening, right? Just rebellion after rebellion after rebellion. Look at Egypt, right? I mean, that's literally what happened there. Overthrowment after overthrowment after overthrowment. It is not the way of the Salaf. It is not the way of the companions. It is not the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And therefore, don't disagree with me, right? This is not mine and your opinion, okay? So we may have our own whims, we may have our own desires, but the best thing to do is to be as, to just be on the straight path, inshallah. So may Allah make that for all of us. We've gone over everything today. It's been a casual show. Inshallah, there'll be more to discuss next week. As always, I've been Sami T Naseem. It's good. It's been fantastic. This show has been a great show. And inshallah, I'll see you next Sunday. Assalamu alaikum.